and McCann.
Greetings and welcome to Wake the Dead. Today we are very blessed to have returning guest Carrie Olaje. Welcome,
Hi.
Carrie. You were our guest for episode 88 of Wake the Dead, and that was a next level episode. I learned things that I didn't think that I would. I didn't expect, and you took my heart and really I felt empathy. I felt the compassion. You really got a hold of me with that story. And the other stories that you shared with Emma Catherine on the Imagination podcast they're positively gut-wrenching. How you survived is amazing. Yeah. And everyone should, if they want to learn more about the specifics of your story, you shared them with Emma on the Imagination podcast, and people can find that on YouTube. And I will link below the two shows that you've already done. And you also have your own show now, which you are just starting on YouTube. And would you share with the listeners the name of that and where they can find that?
Yeah, of course. And I'll just let people preface it, like you said, the Emma show. That's like the first time I've done any sort of like long form testimonial, other than for therapists and law enforcement and supporters and shit like that. So it is intense. It is 3.5 hours long, and the second part does have essentially the first kind of core event, essentially, a little bit longer, talked about in addition to some DID stuff. So I kind of consider the two of them combined, to be kind of like pretty long form testimonial. It's going to be freaking 5 hours or something. So just to let people know, like that. Well, thank you. I like it. It did feel like a huge part of my healing, just to feel like, really, like the day before the podcast, I was just like, if I were to die today and just to have gone through all of this and just it never be told, I was like, that was one of the things I couldn't live with the most, because it would feel like all the suffering was in vain, and not just my suffering, but just the multitudes of other children that I saw that were also, harmed or killed or something, in the pursuit of a psychopath's pleasure, that is what I couldn't really live with. I was like, it is what I feel like is part of my, part of my mission, I guess, on this earth, or something, is that, that the things I went through aren't in vain, and that they're going to help prevent it from happening to more generations of kids, because at this point, like a lot of people have said, I'm pretty young in the whole survivor world. A lot of people are more 50s plus, because it does take you usually until your late 20s or 30s to start recovering memories. And then when you're dealing with things that are really intense, like the SRA or MK Ultra, mind control style things, the level and number of just trauma events that you've gone through, it's you do end up having kind of levels of of memories that your brain allows you to deal with little by little. But that's also kind of segueing into my channel. Essentially, that's my goal, is that I see it as as a two-handed approach, essentially, that I see a sword in one hand and a knife in the other. And I'm and the sword to me is coming onto podcasts like this. This is how, how our voices as survivors are going to get the justice that we need against these people that are perpetuating this insane system that's just built on death and suffering and everything. That it's really, survivors coming out about what they went through, and just the reality of just snuff and child trafficking and just the prevalence of it and everything, like that is really the thing that's gonna, like, you know, that's gonna get some justice for these motherfuckers, you know. And
That's
then
right.
also, you know, and then when I say the knife in the other hand, to me it's visualizing, you know, like, and that's my channel, you know, my channel for survivors specifically. Like, it's always welcoming to allies to help understand like what we go through, but my intention is more for it to be for other survivors to help, like, you know, with that knife to like cut the fucking cord to our abusers, you know, like, and if you've gone through what I have, it feels like there's a lot of them in you, and it's like very systemic, you know, having to do that. But that's what I see is like, you know, is fucking freeing the slaves, you know what I mean? Cutting those you know, those things that bind us, you know, and because it's so fucked up that like that we can be free from the handlers and free from the torture and free from the situations, you know, sometimes for years, but still it's like because you know the survivors never dealt with all of that shit, you know, and being able to process it internally, you know, you just self-sabotage and hold yourself back. And, you know, it's really like sad to see like the degree to which, like, you know, they very intentionally create a prison within our own minds, essentially, like for us, you know, and that is very, you know, it's like a fucking maze trying to get out of there.
Right.
You know, but once you see the way, you know, and that's why I feel like there's more and more resources for other survivors, you know, like there's like some of the classics, you know, Fritz Springmeier and, you know, Kathy O'Brien's story and her, like, you know, Time to Heal book, you know, is like really, really super beneficial. I was going to say
Thanks for the Memories, Bryce Taylor. She did.
There's a lot, you know, of stuff out there, you know, but I do also feel like, you know, the more of it that's out there, the better, especially when you're dealing with survivors that have been healing, because I, in my healing journey, have really gotten different things from multiple survivors, like to really truly understand both like what I went through and then also to understand, well, to be validated a lot of times too, to be like, whoa, like this person, like this is my exact same experience, you know. But then also the fact that, like, you know, it's everyone has their own techniques that they have to come to that work for them when it comes to healing, and there's a lot of them, you know, from traditional therapy things, you know, to it just really runs the gamut. And that's like why, in my experience, if you're DID and you're dealing with like all these different parts and everything, I think it's like the most helpful and beneficial in therapy, or, you know, in your healing process, to essentially like look at all avenues, essentially, because you're like, the different parts have such different worldviews and beliefs about themselves and different stuff that usually is kind of like trying to explain the same thing to one person with like one, or to multiple people with one metaphor, you know, like you kind of sometimes have to like say things in different ways or do things in different ways to be able to get different personality types, different ways of learning, you know, like different people to understand it. And that's kind of been that's been my experience just through healing, is that it's been having to get, you know, learn how to communicate the same concepts with all the different parts, essentially. And that's something that I try and bring to my channel, basically, is that I know I'm going to be dealing not just with multiple people, but also people that are multiples.
Right.
So because of that, you know, it's trying to give, you know, some, just like some little like concrete steps, you know, little exercises, you know. I've even thought maybe of doing a workbook someday or something, because I think really like small, a lot of times exercise geared towards kids and stuff like that is actually sometimes the most beneficial stuff, you know, when it comes to this kind of thing. So
because you have kids inside, right? Because the younger versions of you are locked up in your mind. We talked earlier on the other episode about how one of the ways that you connected with a part of you was to allow it to watercolor, because it doesn't have reading and writing skills at that point yet, and that way you were able to communicate with that aspect, and you were able to get a story without having it to spell it out in words. And that's That's very interesting. Plus, it uses the artistic part of the brain instead of the left side of the brain. It's very well rounded, and it's a very good approach. And I'm sure that the listeners will find great value in that. And you didn't actually say the name of the YouTube. Your YouTube is Desert
Sorry, it's
Dakini.
Desert Dakini. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Desert
sorry.
DESERTDAKINI.
Yes.
Okay, great. That's great, because I want people to find that and be able to have that in their resources.
Thank you.
That's cool.
I only have 2 videos right now. Like, the number of ones I have planned is like, who even knows how many there
It
are.
unfolds exponentially, right?
Exactly. The next one I am going to be doing is just going to be focused on essentially looking at altar formation, system formation, and like specific types of altars, because that's something that can both trip out like the normal public, but then also can trip out the survivor. You deal with a lot of feelings of just like, I'm just crazy, like as part of the programming, but just as part of like dealing with the denial side of things that you always have had as part of the defense mechanisms. So when you encounter parts that are like non-human or sometimes like older, different genders, all that shit, it can be just another thing that's just like, well, I'm just crazy. So understanding,
how do you make sense of those memories? Like,
well, and I would say, kind of like you were saying before, like you were saying, some of those parts are kids. I would essentially reiterate that all of those parts are kids. That essentially, sometimes, if you're already dissociative, you will form parts in adulthood. But a lot of times it's a big stressor that causes it, or big life events and everything. But for the most part, like every part that a survivor is dealing with, until they've actually taken the time to integrate it some into the system, to like sharing consciousness of like what that part went through, and like everything, that's when that part starts growing up, essentially. So essentially, even if the parts like present as like, monsters, demons, an old man, or a fucking crazy fucking, I don't even know. Like it could be anything really, because you're dealing with the mind of a child.
Like a tape recorder or a rock.
So,
you know what I mean? Like what Fritz Springmeier writes about.
No, that's a good segue, because that was one thing that was really trippy for me, is that, there were memories, that were really weird, that the purpose of them was creating essentially like altars that consider themselves inanimate objects, like for sure. So like like it was like a part that considers themselves like a physical like wall in the system, basically.
Wow.
And for that part that visualizes themselves, it's like they have essentially, I don't know how to describe it. It's like, and this makes no logical sense, but that's just how weird they present, So for this part, like, and I think a lot of like the weirdness of these things is that these memories or the torture involve like VR kind of stuff. So it's like you're going to be dealing with like being drugged, being in like a crazy situation. Like most of like my like really intense programming memories are all in like facilities, so this is like, so basically something
military bases, right?
Yeah, I mean, like the closest, so to me there was nothing I ever saw that was like military base, because everything So I had been on base a bunch as a kid and then growing up and stuff.
I was assuming because your father and how the cult is connected in that way to the
military. It's military facilities for sure, but they're like not official. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like they're not. It's not something that people like knows exists.
Just a cement bunker somewhere, like off.
Yeah, it's essentially like something that you would for example, like an entryway to like one of them would have been like a vast just area of just flat land, kind of like I think because of the
like what Burning Man, like where Burning Man is held, like kind of just like an open,
or what that looks like. It was like a big open, kind of open scrubland,
like desert,
distant hills and stuff. Exactly, like that kind of thing. Very similar to, it was like the same kind of location. Like I can't remember if I went into the human hunting event that I was forced to be part of last time or not, but saying it was essentially like the same kind of like location, like you're a kid, so what you're going to remember a lot of times is like,
Right.
at least for me, is going to be more like landscape scenery type shit. You know what I mean?
Right.
But that was one thing that was trippy about this one, essentially, is that it was a very flat area and it was fenced off and everything. And it did look like there might have been like one or two like small like buildings like off in the distance, but it looked like a completely uninhabited area. But as you drive up to it, like there's like just like a ramp that goes into the ground, but you don't even see it until you're like right up on it because of like
because how flat it is, right?
Flat, but it's also in a slight depression, so it's like it's like you just don't see it until like you're right on it, essentially. Like, but it's also got chain link fence around it anyway, so no one's going to get that close to it. But there's no road or anything. It's just like it's just dirt and everything. Like it's like a dirt road basically, but. But some places like that, and so some place like that would be, would essentially have what I would consider programming rooms, which is like this kind of stuff that I've gone through where it's essentially very utilitarian, type of stuff, like where essentially you're just dealing with, levels of, like a prison, like an underground prison cell, or,
right. Where
specific
traumas are played out to create specific breaks within the victim.
I would say like a place like this, like the vibe that it had to me was that it was like an old like Cold War like bunker essentially type of thing, like to where there were you essentially drive in and like you're at like a parking garage level that's just below the surface that the big vehicles get parked at, and then from there you are driving around like the hallways that are between like the rooms and everything in like kind of like small ATV type things. Actually, I think my partner,
like a go-kart type of thing.
Yeah, like a small Jeep go-kart thing. I think my partner the other day said like that like Stranger Things actually had like a very similar looking facility or something.
Yeah,
and I was like, and I haven't like I watched like the first season of Stranger Things, but I couldn't really watch much more of it because it felt like, I don't know, like teenage torture porn to me, like I really get pretty upset, with the amount that Hollywood kind of like glorifies.
Yeah, they romanticize it.
Yeah, they create this idea that like, well, it's all worth it if you get to be a superhero,
Crazy.
And it's like, no. Like if you ask any of those kids, like in that situation, like, would you rather stay here in this cage watching people get tortured and killed and be a superhero, or would you rather be free and go home to your mom? Like, what's the kid no kid's gonna be like, I'm gonna voluntarily stay here because I would love to get just like, like raped and traumatized, like, but one day I'll have to
right. And it's not like they ever turn into a superhero. It's like,
most of the time they want us to fucking self-destruct, and
exactly.
fucking by the time we're in our, adulthood, for sure.
And what you do is like, all you do is follow orders completely. That's not a superhero. That's a total robot. You know what I mean? It's like not a will of your own. Yeah.
You can't use it for your own good. That's what most of my healing that I try and encourage survivors to heal, is to have each of those parts that starts out as an enemy become an ally, and then you essentially gain access to those skills in a way that you can apply them towards who you really are,
right.
so a lot of parts that have had like kind of like bad jobs or something like that, it's like a lot of times healing is essentially getting them to learn how to use their skills in a beneficial, and healing way and stuff like that, so not, it's like sexual parts are just good at performing, so getting them to just be okay, like having those parts like be okay with getting, self-esteem through other ways, other than that, but then still having the confidence to like, to be up on the stage, like I've done a lot of live painting, for example, at tattoo conventions or different stuff, and people are like, oh my God, I could never do that, and, or even this, like a podcast or something. But it's really because, and before I had my healing, I would have never been able to do it either, because I didn't have access to that part of myself. I didn't so essentially it's like, but then once you start healing that part is like, well, like, I want to do my thing too, so then it's like you start growing as a survivor, because you learn, like, how to take things that you felt bad about, and put them towards something that makes you feel good, so like now, being able to help survivors or help people, that are just interested to learn about this stuff, to learn about it, it's something that feels like really healing and really beneficial, and I don't have like any like shitty feelings about it.
Good. Well, God bless you. We need more people, like you said, speaking this truth, because if you don't
It's
look at
happening.
it, it is happening. Exactly. And if you don't look at it, then it's like it'll keep happening. That's what occultism is, to hide it from sight, with and all the manipulations of Hollywood and Stranger Things and whatnot. They show you a little bit of something, and then they obfuscate and they hide the really important stuff. So this is like what we get to hear the real thing from you, and that's why we're so glad. Like, I haven't been able to sit and watch Stranger Things either. Like, I mean, it's nice, it's well done, it's good photography, whatever, but still,
There's a lot of things out there like that, though, that don't have the same fucking propaganda in them.
yeah. And I try to stay watching real artists, but I mean, but in any case, like, so
it happens to us all, we're all gonna fucking dip into the fucking cesspool every now and again to just switch off.
Yeah, let's talk about cesspool. I did one movie, White Noise. I talked about it on my show, and if you've never seen that movie, it is total evil. It is mind control all the way. But you watch my show and listen.
A lot of that stuff nowadays,
Yeah, but I mean, like, it's because they have Netflix, they can see who's watching, how long they watch, if they click on other things, so they can track every click, and they can learn so much more about it, and like who's watching and when. That's much
the main
more.
reason I haven't gone for anonymity, is like, I mean, realistically, with algorithms and AI and blah 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 blah,
right.
Like the fucking Satanists are the ones in the know. You know what I mean? Like they're always the ones in the know.
They created the system. Like,
yeah, exactly. So to me, it was just like, I mean, they know who I am. Like, I haven't had to deal with like much targeting, luckily, but I think I've dealt with like a lot of like keeping tabs on, essentially, and stuff like that. That's kind of what I was like, if I'm telling my story, it was like, I would like, like my face, who I am as a professional, like who people know me have known me as a person, for decades, all this stuff, like, to add that to my story, because I think that's a part of what's like powerful, is because most people know me as just, like the total hippie, like fucking vegetarian, organic eating, spiritual fucking, you know what I mean? Like that it's, that being that and having gone through this, and also having like been forced to do some really horrible things, like as a child, as part of all of this, I think really is eye-opening to people, to know that, like, well, one, I hope it just like inspires survivors to just know that like, that we can create a life, that we are excited about, and we can keep like pushing towards that. And it's a shit ton of work, and I'm always exhausted, but it's like so worth it. Like, I love being an entrepreneur and being like self-employed. I can't, like, I would never give it up.
Good for you. I wish I could do that.
It's a hard road, like, for sure. Like, it's like,
but I mean, working as a slave for like wages is a hard road too. Like,
for sure. It's like, it's a give or take, kind of thing. But that's a lot of it, is I just want people to know, that, like, for people that are survivors, that you can fucking focus, you can heal, and then also do other cool shit, that's gonna make you fulfilled. But then for people that aren't survivors, just to know that, like, like, there's a shit ton of survivors around you, and you have no idea, because a lot of times, like, you're dealing with people who are DID, a lot of times are very high functioning, like that's kind of like the point of having the different parts, is that you're able to be, fly under the radar, like, and everything. And a lot of times, like, be because of your programming, you know, very intentionally, very high achieving and stuff like that. And in part, you know, and this is part of like why I really hated my success up until like when I started healing. Essentially, I was like booked out a year, you know, and just like all this stuff, and I just hated it, you know.
Stressful,
But
right?
it was stressful, you know. But it was also because it was essentially realizing that like I feel like I had never been able to choose to be like good at something. I had always felt like obligated to be good at something, you know, because it
To
had
impress
always.
the masters, like,
Yeah,
right?
it had always been ingrained in me from a really young age to essentially avoid abuse by, you know, doing whatever like my dad or like my handlers wanted, like above and beyond, you know, because
Right.
you get taught to essentially like, you know, you can do exactly what they're asking, you know, too, but sometimes you're gonna take the initiative, you know, because essentially like in your mind as a kid, it's like survival mode, and you're like heading off abuse by like anticipating like, you know, like
Right.
what they're going to be like asking of you or something.
Right.
So for me, it's like, you know, I'd always called it, you know, like the achievement tap dance, you know, is like it just felt like my whole life was just you know, very workaholism, you know, just kind of going from one achievement to another, you know, in part just to like run away from the feelings of like no self-esteem, but also in part because it's like that's what I had been trained to do, you know, and also in part to keep me as, I don't know how to describe it. It keeps you as a survivor busy because you're like, you know, you're constantly
Not
being
thinking about.
yeah, so I had a part that was essentially motivating all of this, that was modeled after my dad. Essentially, at the time I called him slave driver, and that's exactly what he was. Is he saw all the system as his slaves, and that he was essentially, and in your own head, you know, it's like it's you don't it's hard to like to pick it apart for what it is, you know. It's like it's just most people have like that internalized voice of a shitty parent or someone shitty in their life, you know, that they've like, you know, can beat themselves up with a little bit, you know, like when you've gone through like, you know, this kind of stuff and the handlers and everything, they intentionally create parts, you know, like of you that believe that they're mirror images of them so that they can always be quote unquote present in the system and everything. So that was my experience, you know, is that even that I always had like a part that was like my dad, like in my head, you know, that was constantly like go, 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 you know, more and everything. But it essentially keeps you like, it was my defense mechanism keeping me from looking at emotions. It's like anytime I would start looking at emotions or breaking down like emotionally or something like that, it's like that part would find a new goal. And
Right.
then it's like the rest of the parts could do like really were unhappy but couldn't do a whole lot to like to change course, essentially, because that was the part that had been created by our programmers to like essentially have like a lock on like who was out in the system and interacting and everything, you know. So and it keeps us under the radar too, because people are just seeing the achievement and they're like, oh, like, you know, she's a straight A student and she's such a talented artist and all this like shit. Like obviously she didn't go through some crazy shit, you know what I mean? Like my little brother went through not just, you know, but went through physical and like verbal abuse with my dad. I don't think like sexual abuse, but regardless, it's like he was displaying always, you know, though he was the kid that was like not doing things right or something. So he always had the attention, you know, and no one, you know, even my own family, a lot of people just like wouldn't believe that I had gone through this as a kid, because they were like, you know, yeah, you were like really spacey and had a lot of like weird, you know, like fucking signs like that I can look at as a kid. But really they just like are like, yeah, but people like that haven't gone through this shit. You should like people that are talking to themselves on the side of the road. Those are the people, you know, and those people have also gone through this shit, as I would say, but they're just not dissociative, you know, so they've gone this psychotic route, because you just can't deal with that much trauma 24/7 and not be crazy, you know. That's the dissociation, how it's a protective mechanism. If I was thinking about like the intensity of what I went through 24/7, like I would not be able to function as a human being, you know. So
Yeah, you said and maybe it was one of your videos, that there's 3 ways that the mind will split with this trauma. There's dissociative, which is you're lucky if you're that.
Yeah.
because that's a protection mechanism. And then there's psychopath and schizophrenic.
Yeah.
And that
I'm
that makes
not
so
a
much
mental
sense.
health professional, but that was how it was explained to me by a couple of therapists and how I've understood it,
Right,
for sure.
right. And if you think about it, the way that the elites, in quotes, will say, abuse their own kids with SRA to put them in places of power within the system of the satanic order of control in the whole world or whatever. You'd think maybe they got a little bit more to push them into psychopathy. I don't know. Maybe there's like a different because like there's a system.
They sorry, so are you saying that the elites, because they're intentionally after psychopaths, like that they put their kids through more, essentially?
Maybe not more, but maybe
no,
like a
I
different.
think that's accurate.
Okay.
I think that is accurate, so at least from how I understand it, is like if you're dealing with people that are bloodline, which as far as I'm aware, I was not, so if you're dealing with people that are bloodline and that are very like are intended, like you said, for positions of power, whether that's in like the media or politics or whatever
Right.
it is,
Or even the
or
occult
companies,
orders, like the
okay,
like
or the orders, or the companies, or the like this being CEOs of certain,
exactly.
whatever it is, then yeah, like what you're looking at is essentially more 100% like the Fritz Springmeier shit, essentially, or like Laura Worley is like another person who's like talked about that a lot, where because you're dealing, and this is going to be anyone that's like cult related, like, and that's not just people that are hierarchy, but just people that like are, like I've got of at least 2 sex cults that are in my county, essentially, that have been outed, like, that one of them had owned the Karchner Caverns that I was abused in, basically. So like, so like,
wow.
yeah. But in any case, and they work with the Vatican and everything in their little cult town and shit,
Of course.
so yeah, so, and that's
Right.
that's like fucking 30 minutes away from where I live.
Right.
But what was I saying?
Well,
sorry.
so you answered it pretty much. That they do.
Yeah.
It's like they're pushing them intentionally into psychopathy with the abuse. With you, they wanted a follower, an order follower, but the psychopath. Right.
I think their goal was to have a psychopath with me as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah. No, I think that was definitely
because your trauma was whoa. That core split story, I cried at work listening to that. Like,
yeah, no, it's horrible. Like, and and one day I was actually thinking about it last week. I'll do a video that's like going to be a little bit more raw. That's like, this is what it looks like during a flashback. Because that's the thing. Like, I think sometimes it's difficult for people, especially when I'm dealing with, the initial Emma interviews, and I had like, the front part that was created by like the cult, like out, that it's essentially like the amount of defense mechanisms that are there preventing me from talking and everything.
Right.
And I go
and
giggly.
you're nervous. And
exactly. It's like, and really like that part was trained to laugh when she was essentially like saying something that she shouldn't, essentially, or like,
right.
so it's something that I've had difficulty with in therapy, and I like knew I was going to have difficulty with when I was first starting to talk to, because essentially, it's like until the system feels like, that you can be more genuine and upfront, it's like you're going to have, like a lot of people, you have your public persona and you're not public persona for like a DID, or it's like that, but essentially it's like the normal part of yourself feels like it's on a roller coaster and has no ability to affect, like, so really it did take me on that first interview going to the, like, having a bathroom break, and having some time with myself to be like, like, we're in a safe place, this is good, and then to come back, and be a lot more calm, when we were talking about it. For sure.
That episode was really good. I was able to listen very, like, you explained yourself very well, and you made the information available. You did a very good job, even though you think that you were nervous or what. And I think you still got the words out, and it was
I
important.
was just trying to be, I was just trying to be real, I guess, you know what I mean? And not be just not stress my perfectionist self, about how things came out. But yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, like, sorry, oh my God.
You're good. Well, I let me jump in. I can relate.
Psychopathy. Sorry.
Oh, right. Please. Go
Let me
ahead.
finish that. I'll just finish
Please
that
do.
thought real quick.
Please do. Yes.
So for sure, I'll come back to like my training. I think that would be a great thing to kind of segue into, like, if we wanted to talk more about like the specifics of like the rituals or different stuff, you know what I mean? For sure. So because every ritual, it's like a trafficking event. Like people are there because it's a religious event for them. People are there because a lot of times it's being filmed and they're going to be making money off of it. And then
and other people are being blackmailed to be put into the places of power, so they have to go through this initiation, like whatever. So
essentially, like, but most of the people at the ritual are kind of like bloodline, like I was talking about,
right.
a lot
the
of
people
them,
performers, the ones that are reading the words or like saying the stuff or whatever.
In the first ritual that I was part of when I was 4, like the baby that was sacrificed was part of the family, essentially, that lived on the property. So so essentially, when it comes to like how I understand it is that when it comes to the elite, because everyone's in the know, that the trauma starts preconception, so, whether people want to believe it or not, they do a lot of ritualistic type stuff, to, at least in their heads, convince themselves that the baby is being conceived and welcoming in a soul that is going to be like them, a psychopath, basically, a type of thing. So they're going to be doing that. And then once the conception has happened, and the mother is pregnant, a lot of times they're going to be traumatizing the fetus, like the whole time, essentially. And then like the baby, once it's born, is going to go through it's as systematized as like what I went through was because my mom was not part of the cult, and was very loving and everything, is very loving, that, she, I don't know. I think she helped provide that protective mechanism for me, but there's a lot of people in cult, where both of your parents are going to be abusers and stuff. So it's kind of like really a no-win situation from conception, really, for them, so, and there is a genetic component, just like there's a genetic component to dissociation. That's why they target people like me. My dad was a psychopath, is a psychopath, a sociopath, if we want to mince terms, he's a sociopath. And, so was his dad. And then my mom essentially has some like crazy shit on like her side too, but she's also dissociative, as well as blonde haired and blue eyed, which like is another like indicator for
gentlemen prefer blondes, right?
No. So
that movie was like the Marilyn Monroe. But go ahead, please.
Yeah, but okay. So there's a different reason though too. So this is something I haven't fully researched myself, but
is it because of the psychic abilities of a blonde can do
dissociative abilities, basically.
Really?
So like from what I had understood, and the psychic abilities, I think, just comes from the trauma and dissociation. I don't think that really matters like what race you are, but I really think just from my understanding, like I said, I'm not fucking expert on this shit. This is just from my understanding from the shit I went through, So essentially like that, and this is like something that I had heard, and read. I can't remember where. It drives me nuts when that's the case. But in any case, that, part of why the Nazis were so intent on breeding blonde hair, blue-eyed people for super soldiers, basically, was because when they had been studying the Nazis were the first people to kind of officially like systematized, like study
Right.
intergenerational cult families, basically. And what they noticed was that it was a genetic component. And because the blonde and the blue-eyed are like recessive type things, essentially, they noticed a correlation between like the likelihood someone was going to be dissociative, in addition to that, almost like it was almost
Wow.
implying like inbreeding, basically, you know, in the family line that was going to lead to essentially the traits that they wanted. So because that to me always blew my mind. I was like, dude, fucking Hitler was like this like fucking brown dude, you know what I mean?
Right.
I was like, why is he so obsessed with blonde haired, blue eyed people? But when you understand that it's like what all slaves, you know, or people that have been through this have gone through, is essentially they're obsessed with breeding, basically. And
Right.
for them, you know, it's, I think a lot of it was that, you know, because, you know, a super soldier, like, you want the dissociation to be the number one characteristic, because you don't want to train people to have all these skills and then have them have free will to use them against you, possibly, you know. So that's
Right.
why they focus their, you know, the training there. So essentially, I even wonder if, you know, my dad, you know, was tasked with finding, you know, someone like my mom, essentially, you know, blonde hair, blue eyed, with like a past of sexual abuse, you know, that she had shared with him, you know, and she herself
Right.
has some issues with the dissociation and everything
Right.
like that. So
That makes a lot of sense. And if you look at animals, I know of people that were breeding foxes in like a controlled environment. They were trying to make a more a less aggressive
mhm.
fox so that they could make the pelts and they wouldn't fight in the cage or whatever,
Yeah,
so they could harvest their skin and fur or whatever.
yeah.
And so what they did was, and this goes into like how they created a dog out of a wolf. And I hope that's not triggering talking about this, those words. But anyway,
I don't think triggers are something we can avoid in this conversation.
okay, yeah, I guess you're right. So, but these foxes, so what they did was like when they were, they would only breed the ones that had a very low fight or flight response.
Yeah.
And so over the generations of the breeding of these foxes, they became black and white. They
Hmm.
lost the other colors of their
Weird.
fur, and they started barking like dogs.
Weird.
Yeah. So these things are related,
Yeah,
like
there's different genetic components that are like,
right.
yeah.
The
And that's how I
behaviors.
saw it. It's like a physical tell that they can see, that's like, okay, maybe this
Right.
person, like, just from, you know, just without knowing anything about their past, maybe this person is going to be a better candidate, you know,
Right.
for that kind of thing, you know.
Right.
Um
That
for
makes
sure.
total sense. And they they basically worshipped Henry Ford, like if you look at but they loved the idea of having an assembly line, and they wanted to get everything in the system like a meat
Yeah,
grinder, and that makes sense because if they
that's
want,
what
yeah,
that's what elite that's what I think elite, you know, bloodline, occult, Illuminati, whatever
right,
the fuck you want to call it, that's what those children go through, essentially, is that you're going to have variations depending on the specific belief system of the cult you're dealing with, but ultimately, like the systemization, you know, like the assembly line nature of like what they've created for fucking childhood torture to create what they want, you know, is very real. You know, it was created in Nazi Germany, you know, is when they
right,
finally, like, with Mengele, finally systematized, you know, how everything was going to work, you know, and they had lots and lots of victims to figure that shit out, you know, like,
yes,
and essentially, you know, paperclip, and then now like MK Ultra, and all, like, essentially people like me, you know, are just dealing with like the fallout of that
right,
fucking research, you know, essentially, and
right.
psychopaths that want to use it to, you know, to control people, you know. So
That's right. So
um
what you just described is a government program. So not only was it satanic and cult, but it was a government program. And that's one of the big things of my show is to show everybody how all this is related. You know, that's a big reason why I'm anarchist, because I don't want to follow orders from a Satanist. And so so now we can apply all our other knowledge.
I'm an anarchist as well. So like, yeah, I don't
Thank
believe in
God.
rulers.
Yeah.
Like I tell people, I'm like, the people that are going to break the laws, they don't care about the laws. They do it
Right.
anyway. They don't. It's not
That's
the
right.
law. It's not the
Right.
law or the thought of like a police officer over there that stops them from doing what they're doing.
Right.
Like we're talking about psychopaths here. You know, the only
Right.
people that like we're putting laws on the books for is people that are going to follow them anyway.
Right. And that's another thing when everybody's like, oh, what if there was no cops, or if there was no laws on the books, like everybody would be murderers and everybody would be robbing banks. I'm like, come on. Would you murder and rob? And they're like,
That's what I
no.
say. I'm like, are
I
you
say
telling
no.
me that if that was gone tomorrow, that you would suddenly start
Right.
murdering? Or like, you know, so that
They
but
just
that's
assume, you know, and the mind
well, that's
control, like,
it's
you know.
it's the propaganda, you know,
Right.
like anarchy to most people equals chaos. And there's been, you know, just
Right.
like I complain about, you know, how fucked up it is the way they portray trauma programming and like all these Hollywood movies. It's the same with anarchy. It's always the purge. It's always, you know,
Right.
it's always, you've never seen like like a version where people are, you know, and that's what's crazy to me is like people act like there aren't like plenty of fucking human beings in like civil like fucking groups around the world that don't live under a fucking direct rule of fucking, you know, some sort of like government, you know, their role, whatever. And they're not, you know, yeah, you are going to have like cults finding isolated areas, but they also live in city centers. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's
right.
Yeah.
And an anarchist, like, you know, they're like trying to have individual freedom, and they're not trying to control others. And so like it's based on like to control another person is based in like fear and domination. So this, like, going back to what I was saying about the government, is a satanic world controlling system, like our government and other governments together. And we can see in this current, you know, past 3 years, it's very obvious that there's a war on us, you know. And it seems like the chaos is ramping up, like,
oh yeah, and it's gonna get worse.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that. So like on our last show, you described how you were trained to be a hunter tracker. That's the term that you used. And there, basically, you started describing this New World Order plan for the world, and the chaos that would ensue.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that sounds just like Russ Dizdar and his, you know, Black Awakening. I sent you the book. I mean, I'm sure you haven't read it.
I haven't started it yet, and I've actually had like I think like 2 more people like mention it to me since you did too. So I'm like,
really?
all right, I need to get to that. I'm still working on Fritz right now.
Oh, there's a lot voluminous with Fritz. It's like
I know, but it's so helpful that it's hard for me to put it down.
That's great. And Fritz is a friend of friends, so like maybe someday it would be great
Tell
if
him I
we
say
could
thank you. You know, it's insanely, to me, it's just his work more than anyone else's has been mind blowing, because I came to it after dealing with a lot of my recall essentially, and had been avoiding it up until then, specifically because I was afraid of the triggering and all that kind of stuff. But
it
what
even says in the front pages, like, this is going to be triggering.
Yeah, for sure. So, but I had to pick it up because my partner had been reading it, and he was like, everything you're talking about is like fucking in this book, you know? And I was like, okay, like I'm going to have like, felt like I was at the point to read it. And it is crazy how validating it is. Like, I mean, especially for me, it's like I've gotten a lot of insight on like the physical structure that they created for my system. You know, it's not
the
physical,
internal map.
like internal. Yeah, but it was like modeled after like when I was a kid, looking at and seeing a physical structure basically that they used to essentially like as a programming event to essentially like kind of like for that part to essentially like internalize like what the internal system looks like, where the different like you know, rooms are for the different parts of the system and everything. And that was one thing that was really trippy to me, is like as I was working on getting all this stuff back, you know, to just like to like read his stuff and then look at like my diagrams, and I was like, all right, this is like, it's got to be true, because it's like, you know, there's so many things, you know. It's not like, it's probably like about a 90% match, you know, like there's, because that's the thing, like I said, I wasn't bloodline, you know, like I wasn't, I was essentially, I think I was essentially picked, you know, because my dad's a sociopath. And I think that was the goal, was to create a sociopath out of me. My first, like, the beta trainer that I had, you know, he had a daughter that was a couple years older than me, and she was also on that same path, basically, to where, you know, that they're trying to create like a Ghislaine Maxwell. They're trying to create someone that's going to just be just like a male psychopath, you know, that's going to be able to just, you know, do whatever with no
Hillary
empathy.
Clinton or whatever.
Yeah, no, exactly. You know, like there's tons of women out there that are total fucking psychopaths, and it pisses me off that it's just because they're psychopaths. It's just another thing they'll hide behind, you know. It's like, oh, but I'm a like, just think of your mother, and look at me, I'm a woman too, you know. And it's like, fuck off.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but then when you hear the story about Kathy O'Brien having her genitalia altered so that it looks like a demon because it makes Hillary Clinton hot when she goes down on it, it's like, whoa. And then you see on YouTube, like, Kathy O'Brien like puts it on camera. We can see the demon face. They like used a laser or some acid to burn it. Whoa, dude.
That's what I'm saying. So for me, I think that was the goal for me. I think that they hope.
Can't believe I just said that. I'm sorry, listeners. I'm sorry. I'm talking about genitalia looking like a demon. Like, sorry, but that's like, go ahead. Like these women
it's
are
fucked
like,
up, you know. I hate laughing because it is so ridiculously fucked up. You know, talking about genital mutilation, you know.
Yeah.
But it is like, I mean, it is almost comical in how like ridiculously over the top psychopaths are in their like fetishes and like, it's
who
just
thinks
like,
of that? Like, wow.
Like, why, like, so much work to go into like something, you know what I mean? Like, but regardless, you know, so when it came to like the hunter tracker kind of stuff.
Thanks for that, bringing us back to that, because like that, I want to learn more about the plan.
And what I'm saying too is like, I'm going to tell you guys about the plan as it was instructed to me. But like I said, I don't give too much weight to it, because to me, I think part of their programming of the slaves to have this NWO stuff is part of the thing they get off on, you know, is like, it's not, and it's the whole, like you said, the visualization. You're not just using your own energy. Now you have like this army of slaves that are also visualizing this thing, you know, kind of past, and wholeheartedly believing it and wanting it, because a lot of their parts of them, they've been, you know, like, they've been created, you know, to be dissociated from all the abuse and to become abusers themselves. Like, so on a certain level, you know, when it comes to this kind of stuff, I'm just like, you know, it is an agenda, you know, but I don't like giving the psychopaths too much power. And I like reiterating the fact that the timeline is totally off. Like, me and like so many survivors have said this, you know, that we were, you know, that really we're like 20 years or something behind schedule. Like,
should have started with 9/11, right? That was the beginning of where they really wanted to go down.
There's so many things, you know, like that seems like, you know, it was the intention, you know, for sure, you know, and it's the thing is, it's, you know, Lucifer's plan is always getting foiled, you know. Well, so
it takes our consent, like all of us have to consent with the evil, and we're not
ultimately they can't
evil enough yet.
They think that they keep testing us, hoping that we're evil enough, you know, but ultimately like it's not the case, you know, like, and they still have the pushback, you know what I mean? Like, and they've been trying to program everyone for the past decade hard to be villains and fucking jokers and all that, you know, like fucking to be child prostitutes and fucking OnlyFans and, you know, yada yada. They've done everything to try and get everyone.
And now they got TikTok.
It still hasn't, but it still hasn't worked. That's like the point is like, you can also go on those same platforms and see incredibly beautiful healing things, you know? It's and that's what I'm saying. Like, so their timeline is constantly getting fucked up because of it. But the thing is like, that I want to reiterate with people is, we are dealing with psychopaths here. And if a fucking psychopath is going down, they're gonna do anything they can to take the fucking world down with them, at the same time, so and which is why most of the time if they do get caught, they kill themselves. Sometimes they get suicided, but a lot of times just run-of-the-mill pedophile psychopaths, they kill themselves because to them it's like it's the last thing of control, and they don't want to live through like the humiliation and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like, you can't fire me, I quit,
Just like Hunter Thompson.
Yeah.
I think that he was filming snuff films.
Yeah.
So and then like he got so old and
he
banged.
From in like
Right.
his shit,
Right.
And that's one thing that I think is like the way I view that specifically is that I think it's like, I don't know how to describe it. Like when it comes to the rituals, it's like the way they act. It's like, for psychopaths that this like adrenalized blood is like a fucking drug.
Yes.
But, realistically, like you're not going to have a fucking ritual like every other night or anything like that, So like, I think that from my interpretation, ideally they would like to get it straight from the source, but that essentially Adrenochrome, because they're still addicts of this shit and they're never going to tell themselves no if they want something, that the Adrenochrome has essentially become like the refined portable version of it, to where they can get it whenever they want, as opposed to just being at the rituals like it had been,
right,
or whatever, what I mean?
Right.
Like I still think that's their preferred, because the thing is that's it's not, I would compare it to like an alcoholic, like there's some people that, just go home and sit and drink, but there's a lot of people that, they look forward to, all the shit, going out and doing all that kind of stuff, because it's like, it's a whole experience, that, and they enjoy all of that. And that's what I'm saying for a lot of people, it's either going to be the religious dogma or it's going to be this kind of thing. They're just psychopaths and it's just an event where they're going to be able to witness some snuff and, get some of that fucking shit that they really like, and it's like it's like dinner and a show for them, you know what I mean? Like that's like the like the preferred,
that's the level of evil, right?
And realistically, like I haven't seen, kids in cages being harvested or anything like that. I don't have memory of that. But having been in like a bunker type facility, it's like, I mean, they're massive. Like the likelihood that could be the case, like is ridiculously high, So, and that was kind of,
and there's like, and like Al Gore gets like, gets off a plane and he's got his carry-on with like 4 liters of blood in it. Like, why? What's that all about? And and like Joe Biden talks to the reporters and he says, some people think Democrats drink baby blood. I'm like, yeah, we do. Like,
well, but the Republicans do too, and your local
all of
doctor
them
does, and your local priest does, and you know what I mean? Like it's not fucking it doesn't isolate itself to any sector of society, like you'll
Jay
have
Jay Parker says, I mean, his mom was bloodline, and she was saying back in the 60s that it was 10% of America was like bloodline cult, like doing the workings, so that feels
a little high to me, but I mean, I would believe, because that to me sounds like, maybe something
maybe
like,
they wish it was 10, or like
that's what I was gonna say.
That's
kind of like the COVID jab numbers where they're like, oh, like everyone's gotten it, and then you actually look at it and it's like, no, like why are you having to bribe people then?
I don't need a donut or whatever,
pizza, fucking lottery ticket.
Oh, there's fries with this as well. Oh,
exactly. It's like
it was such mind control. It was like okay. All right. So like, this is great talking to you. I love this. These people, it's like an organized thing. They do have an ego and their plan is a little bit over the top. Right?
Well, it's the archetype that we see in every movie of like that Dr. Evil, that's like an archetype for a reason, that fucking
007 bad guys,
mastermind bad guy that's like sitting behind his desk like I'll control everyone one day, but it's like, it's all of them, because that's the thing, like that the main thing a psychopath or sociopath is after is power and control. That's the
Right.
thing they get off on the most. It's the thing, that it's their main motivation in life. So to think, that generations of psychopaths, especially when you're dealing with people that are very wealthy and have stayed in very wealthy positions, and for us, we don't understand as like being like not ridiculously rich, the level of patience that they can have too with like enacting their things, because they're still sitting
Right.
pretty. They're not like, it's not like they're like, oh, we got to hurry up and finish this because we're like running out of money.
Right.
Like, no, like they're like,
They think
oh, not
in
time
like
yet. I guess we'll push
generations
it. Yeah.
of their
But
like that's why they have to abuse the kid in order to continue the plan, because it can't
yeah, oh
happen in
yeah.
one lifetime. They have to make it go. Like, I mean, look at the Rothschild family, like how they like systematically put themselves in the banks of all the 5 countries and like organized it, like, and they were like working for the Vatican. Like it
It's
takes a
probably why they
long
have so many kids
time
a lot of times
to get.
too,
What's
because you
that?
don't know. It's probably why they have so many kids too. Like a lot of times those
Right.
elite families have a lot of kids,
Yeah.
My dad was like one of 8, but it's
Wow.
it's very, so like I think they said like it's like 1 in 10 or something like that are
Yeah.
going to be exposed to the psychopathy. So they don't know, they need one of their bloodline to fucking carry shit on, but they don't know who it's going to be until they've
Right.
really realistically, till they've put them through all this shit, you know what I mean, and see what you get on the other side
Right.
of it. That's why I was saying with me, I think the intention was that I was going to be like my dad, and get to the point, where I was willingly doing the things that I was being programmed and forced to do,
Right.
basically, like, and shutting off that empathy and everything. But I mean, it never happened. It's like I've always had like a very like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like even in my like healing, having like, moments of recollection of, and this is where it's going to get a little woo woo, moments of recollection of like, when in a dissociative state, it's like my main part of my soul was like fucking like in the ether or whatever, fucking like, just like light realm or something. And I was meeting with like essentially like my higher power, like, so it depends on what part, whether that presents as like Jesus or who that presents as, but regardless, like it was like going through these, essentially like having as part of the memories coming up, like times like when the trauma had been particularly bad, like I had like at least one like near death experience and stuff, like where it's like almost like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like that part of you like connects with like creator and like kind of realizes what I believe, that like our souls kind of choose our path essentially a little bit. And that like, at least for me, it's like, it always felt like I was given the opportunity from my like higher power to like check out, and that my true self, always held on, because what I was told, was that there was a reason, that I could choose at any time to like give up this burden, but if I wanted to take it, there was some good that I could do in the world with it. You know what I mean? Sorry, this is stuff that always makes me cry. But
I love
so
it.
that for me, has been incredibly important in my healing process, to understand that, that like that, but it's also knowing that like, I don't know how to describe it. I feel like the opposite happens as well. That essentially that I do kind of feel, because I don't have the logic that, a pure soul chooses to incarnate as a psychopath, like to do to provide the evil in the world, to counterbalance the good. I personally don't believe that.
Me neither. Right. It's
I
like an
believe
accident.
that I believe like you go one of two places when you die, and if your fucking deeds have fucking lowered your vibration enough, like you're going to end up in the hell realm, and not with your higher power, basically, because that's
Right.
the trajectory you've set for yourself, essentially. And I feel like if you've done that much to get yourself there, that a lot of times, those souls are then in bondage to the demons that they've been serving, and are essentially convinced to reincarnate essentially as agents of the darkness, essentially, as opposed to agents of the light.
Right.
I do still believe like that all of them at their core are truly connected to higher power and everything like that. But it's like, I kind of see it as like, it's like a serious level of like delusion, you know what I mean? Like that when they've really, you know, believed the darkness and with their actions like pursued that same stuff, you know what I mean? But I do believe that that's why I believe in the Buddhist stuff, like that karma is really long, you know, and that like even the fucking craziest shit, you know, that people do in humanity, you know, that we can, you know, choose to correct our course at some point, you know. And
Right.
and that's my goal, you know. My thought, you know, is like, you know, that's our goal for the whole world, you know, is that, you know, all the abusers would get to the point where they could acknowledge like what they had done, you know, was wrong. And on a certain level, like
it might take many
let's come out.
lifetimes.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. Like, but
Yeah.
but that's why we have to come out and fucking control this shit before they do it themselves, because they're not going to. You know,
Right.
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, we're talking about like, if we're looking at that, we're talking like probably a fucking million years or something like that. You know, we're not looking at anytime soon. You
That's
know,
true.
like for sure. You know, like maybe
Yeah.
sooner. Like I would hope that like maybe we're in some sort of end times and it's something that's going to come like sooner. But if not, you know, it's just realizing that it's just the reality of things, and like we have to choose to continue to be on the side of good, you know, basically. Right. And it really doesn't, like, as much as you think it benefits you doing the fucking other shit, it constantly just leads to fucking death and unhappiness, you know. So
right. And separation from creator, like
yeah. I think that's a lot of their shit, is just that because they're so afraid of death, you know, because they know that they don't have creator on the other side of it, and most likely have a lot of pain or something on the other side of it, you know, because they're, like I said, like once you're in the ether, the fucking demons like have no fucking holds barred, you know what I mean, on like what the fuck's going on, you know. So
I wonder if the demons are souls that have been rejected and can't get back to creator, and they have to feed on us. Like, I've done a lot of work looking into that, and I've spoken to Jerry Marzinski on my show, and he speaks to schizophrenics, and he learns about the demons that are riding them basically and sucking their energy. And they describe as like they're doing a job and they have to do what they're told, and they're beyond time, so like they have more knowledge because we're stuck in the time, but they have parameters that they're allowed to work within, and they can feed on us. But if they don't follow orders, then they'll be sent to the pit, whatever that is. Like, that's how
we have
those
a pit
words.
in our system. I think most people, like a lot of people do, you know, it's like a, you know,
and the demonization that happens with the rape and the SRA trauma. Sometimes they invite the demons with ritual, whether it's real or just convincing the victim that they have a demon, you know, like either way.
I would say even if it's real, it's still convincing. Like it's still convincing that person. So how I understand it, the thing that has made the most sense to me is, have you ever read C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters?
No, but I will.
I would highly recommend it for anyone. It's a total mind fuck, you know, like, but essentially it's him writing a dialogue between a new demon, which is essentially like what you're saying. It's like, it's not actually a demon. It's essentially like a fucking committed soul. You know what I mean? A soul that's, like I said, you know, has done so much bad, you know, that they fucking, their trajectory once they pass, you know, was fucking straight into hell, essentially, you know. And that, so, and if you know anything about like the hierarchies that people have talked about in hell, is that you're going to have different rankings and stuff like that. So that's what I understand it is. Like the foot soldiers are what you're saying are like our souls, essentially, that are being
cut off from the light of the creator. They can't.
They chose to, in their lifetime, chose to cut off themselves from the creator, so that when they passed, they did not go to creator. They go the opposite way, you know. Right. And but who they report to is what I see as like demons, you know. So you have demons and you have angels. You know, you can't ascribe more power to demons than angels have, essentially, you know. That they're essentially kind of like the same thing. So they have power to like influence us in this realm, you know, but they don't have power, as far as I'm aware, you know, to like fucking physically incarnate, you know, unless they're using the help of another person.
Jerry said that there was like an electric crackle that went like up the wall and like across the ceiling and then down into a trash can, and it was like very spooky. But
you're dealing with like frequencies and like all this shit. So for sure, you know, but like corporeal, like as in like a physical body, that's what I don't personally see like as a reality. And
they have to ride our corpses. They have to ride, to
and
feel the feelings.
Like in our life, it's like death in our lifetime, basically, if you become a sociopath, because it's like you've gotten to the point where you chose to cut yourself off with your higher power. You're still alive though, but now it's like you're like almost like you're a doorway,
a broken husk.
Yeah,
like
you're
the
a husk
Kleepoth of the fucking Kabbalah. Like once
the good is gone, it leaves a big old fucking gaping hole that can be filled by these things, and essentially they're going to be attracted to you depending on your frequency, you know. So if you're someone that likes, you know, fucking kids and drinking blood, you know, then those are the demons that are going to be like, yeah. Or if you're someone that's just, you know, likes, I don't know, like
doing alcohol or like meth or whatever,
drinking a bunch of booze, or who knows, you know, like those are the souls, you know, or demons essentially that are gonna like ride you. And it's because they want, you know, they like at that point, like your desire and their desire is the same, you know. When you have no empathy, you know, like you do want the same things that they want, you know, the destruction and the suffering and all that kind of stuff. So that's how I understand it, is that, you know, there's going to be the hierarchy, there's going to be the souls, there's going to be essentially the demons that like you'll find in like, you know, the demonology books that are essentially
the Goetia of John Dee,
that are like more eternal type things, you know, that have been around since the fall, basically, you know. So the souls can kind of come and go and incarnate, from how I understand it, but then you have the demons that are the ones that followed Lucifer in the beginning, essentially. So we're just like, you know, fallen angels essentially, and they're, you know, they're the different generals and, you know, the hierarchy of like the legions of hell of the souls that come through there. So essentially Screwtape is essentially like one of those demons. He takes the form of giant centipede, I guess, like in the thing, and he's instructing this new soul that's a new demon, basically, on how to torment the person that he's assigned to on Earth, basically. That every person on Earth is assigned, you know, one of these souls to essentially like whisper in your ear, you know, these different, you know, kind of like, you know, urgings or whatever, and it's up to us whether or not we take that bait, you know. So but it's insane, because you could even just look at it as like looking at our own internal dialogue or something like that, you know, if you didn't want to believe the whole, you know, Christian paradigm or whatever, and it still will just give you tons of insight onto how your fucking mind works. So I would highly recommend it for anyone, you know. Screwtape Letters, and actually it's a great one for audiobook because it's a conversation. So I like, you know, I kind of like the audiobook version of it a lot because of that, you know. So
I've got it written down. So like you were saying earlier about how the Moonchild type ritual, like I don't know if you know about Crowley, he wrote this book Moonchild or the Butterfly Net. There's 2 titles, and they do rituals before the pregnancy happens and while the pregnancy is happening to influence. And like, and we talked to Janice Barcelo on my show like maybe 2 episodes ago, and she talks about how the birth trauma for like all mothers in hospitals is on purpose, and for babiys to, and of course,
the more I learned about it, the more I came to that conclusion too. That's why I had the home birth, you know. I had a water birth at, you know, my mom's house and everything, because I was just like, whoa, this is like the amount of like traumatizing things I'd be subjecting myself and my baby to. It's like,
right. And so like, and that's how they create these people that are complete psychopaths that are in these places of power, and they're doing the work of, like, they have a hierarchy too. Like the demons have this hierarchy. If you look at the Goetia, like one of them, like it'll be listed if this one has this many legions of under him, and they all like work together. And it's kind of the same structure of like the Pope and the cardinals, and
For the military.
right. And it like a really hierarchy is basically an evil thing. It's an evil structure.
I agree.
It's like,
If we go on the anarchy kick, any hierarchy
again,
like we're talking about is essentially is modeled after fucking Satan's technology. It's not. There's a reason it's counter to natural law. It doesn't ultimately, because it ends up not being based on merit. Like it's how it seems.
Obedience to evil, and it's always evil at the top.
It's about obedience versus merit and stuff. Yeah.
Right. And it's like the opposite of free will. And so like these people that are working together that are not doing their free will, like they have this orchestrated system, and we all see it. Like all of us that are like aware and looking around can I mean, especially with the pandemic bullshit, like the whole world locked down and attacked us. So like is this gonna get, how do they plan if they had no obstacles? How would that go down?
Well, and I would argue a tiny bit like that.
Please.
We did experience them coming after us to a degree, but
I mean, like the jab is like it's an attack on our body, like
sorry,
a physical attack,
about like anarchists or like that community.
No, I mean like all of the world. Like I was going back to the NWO, like these.
Okay, got it.
These like they're like these people, they negate their own free will. They work in obedience to evil. They're in concert with each other.
Well, they don't think they're negating their own free will. They just think that.
Well, they do the left-hand path, right? They're going. Their free will is to go away from their higher self, like, or So
in their minds, they're behaving 100% selfishly. It's will incarnate. Right. You know what I mean? Like,
right, and ego, like to the max, and like, right.
Yeah, it's like will without like, we
without
have
love. Right.
Yeah, will without love, exactly. Without compassion, without the empathy. If you don't have empathy, then you're gonna you're just gonna fucking just fuck up yourself and everyone around you. That's what we're seeing. So I would argue, that's why things are continuing to get so crazy is because they 100% have an agenda, like a goal, that they would like for all of us, all human beings, to essentially be like under their thumb, like tracked, traced in, like essentially China for the whole world, everyone knows like what everyone's doing, and everyone has the roles that they're assigned to, and and there's just essentially they want, like you said, no free will. Essentially, that's the thing that they can't deal with. Is the fact that that there's I mean, they can't even understand it too. Like, is that the rest of people just behave so counter to the way they think, that the thought of like a mother sacrificing herself for her child or something like that is like, to them is totally foreign. And I really think that's a big part of why they created the AI, was because they realized how bad they were at understanding human will. and essentially that's what they've been trying to do, is essentially like, because they realize their predictions are always constantly off, so they're just like, that's how a psychopath thinks. They just think, I just need more data. I just need more data. If I had more data, I could understand this love thing, I could understand this God thing, but you won't.
They're trapped in that left brain trying to calculate it, right?
Exactly. And I think that's part of like why we're getting pushed into like that whole, all of that stuff, social credit, all that different shit, and like is because they, they're trying to understand something they can't, and ultimately like it's because they want to control us all. I think for them, like realistically, they know like that they're vastly outnumbered by us, so they're not going to pull the trigger until they know it's a sure thing, and that's where I feel like, we're experiencing the death by 1,000 cuts at this point, is because like Screwtape put it, actually, it was like really great, you know, is that he was like, you know, we wouldn't fill the halls of hell if everyone was a murderer, you know, like, because if people suddenly start becoming murderers, like people like would notice that there was some demonic involvement or that shit was like going on or something, or if they suddenly had this urge to do something that was so outside their character, like they would fucking know. Like really, they're like, how you get people into hell is by like a million little things that slowly just kind of like nudge them off the path, you know. And that's essentially how, you know, they're like, we would rather have, you know, our halls filled with like a million like half as good sinners, you know, as spending the effort of trying to make everyone literal psychopaths, like, you know, and then have like a quarter the amount of like souls to deal with, essentially. Like that was their, so essentially that's kind of how I view it, you know, is that everything has been trying to push people into either not fighting back against their psychopathic agenda or being on board with it, essentially. So either being in a position where they feel like they're completely helpless and I don't know what to think and I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to sit back and just let you guys decide, or they want
trust
people,
the science or whatever.
yeah, trust the science, you know what I mean? I don't have to do any research, you know. I just like, you know, I was like, how is it that I knew like the shit that fucking that the New York Times was going to say about the fucking PCR like revolutions and everything 6 months before they did? I'm like, because I'm some fucking fantastic researcher. It's like, no, I just take 2 seconds to learn about what PCR test is and different stuff. I'm like, this stuff is not like
all
hard.
we got to do
like,
is just look. Like all the information is there, but nobody looks. They're just like passively.
Was one of my best years, because like I early on realized that there like wasn't quite as much, you know, how much propaganda there was, you know, and it was just like, okay, cool. Well, I guess like we're gonna travel a lot of places and it's gonna be empty. This is great.
right. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. All the order followers were like locked up in their house with a mask on, and like we could go enjoy the world. Right.
I know. I love smiling at people. I was like, I don't know what you look like behind there, but here's a smile.
Yeah. You know what? I worked at a gas. This is a little thing about the smile. Like I worked at a gas station for a little bit, and they like I would see the products on the shelf, and during the real lockdown of the masks, they were selling Lay's potato chips with a smile on each bag, from like the nose down, smiling face. And it was like, whoa, the only place you see a smile is there on the shelf, and it's Lay's, and you're like, oh, I want that. Like, you know, but I mean, it's just like, because we crave it. Like we miss smiles, and then they make us grab the bag because of that. Like it's so subconscious. It's like really.
Yeah, no, that whole event was, I'm pretty sure, like a programming event, more so for the youth. You know, that's what most people don't pay attention to. Is like they have to pay attention to like how hard it was on everyone. You know, it's like, yeah, but if you were a developing kid at that time, you know, like your worldview is totally fucking crazy. You know what I mean? Like so.
And it took like the first event with 9/11, then they waited 20 years, and then their kids, they're attacking with this next level. Yeah. So like you said, they're nudging, you know.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's going to create essentially like, so for me, most of my programming was about creating the worldview that my abusers have inside of me, so that it was normal to obey. It's like if you have only like a certain worldview, like you're growing up in a cult, you know, like doing anything else feels abnormal, you know. So that's really what I think, you know, has been going on, you know, is them trying to groom people into either sitting back and like not fighting it, or like we're saying, is I think that there's been a lot of like inversion of like the hero's journey and stuff, and like in the media and different stuff from the past decade, essentially, where you know,
or longer,
horrifying villains, you know. Well, I feel like that's really when I noticed the shift, is it started going from like purely good heroes and bad guys to essentially the lines now are blurred. You know, your heroes are gritty and real. You know, you had Daredevil and all those people that are like alcoholics and all this other shit. You know, but or like a hero. And then you have all your bad guys nowadays that are like, oh, but I can empathize with them because look at their backstory. You know what I mean? So it makes it in people's heads, especially kids, it makes it like a viable option to be like, well, a criminal is just equal to a fucking hero. You know, like, and that's where we we've gotten into very intentionally, you know, or like getting kids to
You mentioned the Joker earlier.
You know,
you mentioned the Joker earlier, and that's a big one.
Archetype is very big. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
In the past, you know, this whole, I don't like the whole simulation theory shit or the multiverse shit or all of that stuff, because to me it really does
Solipsism.
It reinforces this idea that all of the psychopaths have, that, you know, nothing really matters ultimately, and things are stupid and just like whatever, you know, and
nihilism.
Like, why this is a video game, so why not go fucking run around and kill everyone, you know? It doesn't really matter anyway, you know what I mean? It's like, even if this was a video game, like, I can't do that. Like, morally, like, it doesn't make me feel good. So like, how about I just don't, you know, like,
but there are some DDNOS people like James Holmes that dressed up like the Joker and went and was there at that shooting at the I don't know if he's the one that was shooting or who opened the doors, but he was there sitting in his car waiting to get arrested at the end, like he was programmed to do so. Right. Exactly. Just like Sirhan, and just like the guy who killed Lenin, you know, these people, they're like the clown that everybody looks at while the real murderer does the business. And then, you know, so like there was a guy in Japan that dressed up like the Joker and stabbed a bunch of people on the train. And then he like sat down and smoked a cigarette and like waited for them to arrest him. Like so these people, and like the Black Awakening book describes, like Russ Dizdar was tracking this German cult of the Black Flame, I think. And the altars or the demons or whatever would like yell at him, and like you know, he'd have him in a police interrogation room, and like he'd be asking him about like what's going to happen, and they're like saying that you know, like they're basically they say like, you guys you don't even get it, like we own the world already. And you know, and I kind of described to you about how like they're going to create the chaos to invite the Antichrist, basically to bring peace to the world again, and that person would unite the world, and then after that would be one world order, right? Do you agree with that whole sentiment?
I mean, I would say that with my stuff, it was never discussed on who the ruling structure was going to be, basically, you know.
But you were just going to be following orders
or something like that. Yeah, but it was made very clear to me, you know, that essentially that was the agenda, that the one world government was the agenda, you know. So, and we're talking about like the wolf part now for the most part, you know, and then like like an assassin type,
the hunter tracker.
Yeah. So essentially there was, you know, and there's other parts too that were involved with that would have been different phases of the takeover.
Different, like after this happens, you'll do this job, and after that part of the phase, you'll do the next job that you're programmed for, right?
Yeah. So for the hunter tracker stuff, it was essentially that that there was just going to be a time, and that's where it wasn't told to me what was going to happen. It was just told me that there was going to be a time that there was a lot of refugees, essentially, you know.
So refugee, like people running away from their country across borders like we have now, or people running away from
the hills, essentially, like is how they was described to me, at least, you know, is that people were going to be essentially trying
away
to run
from the cities,
run into essentially like the wilderness. And I don't know what they would have been running from, because that's what I was saying, that wasn't really discussed with me. It was just discussed that they were going to take over, and that when they did, that there was going to be a lot of people that didn't want to cooperate, basically. So once that was the phase that essentially I was going to be, you know, so I was trained with like two other boys, like at the same time during like when I was going through training at the dog kennel that I had talked about, you know, and they were also in like at the human hunting event and everything. It was always the three of us being trained together. Essentially, they had their own handlers and everything. We were trained to be like to be seen as like a team, though, like that. And essentially the understanding was that, that I was the leader of the team because my handler was like the most, senior, he was sergeant major of the army and everything. So he was considered like the leader. So therefore I was the leader of the pack, basically. But most of like my training was to be completely alone, essentially, so not necessarily to be leading others, but to be by myself. That's a lot of like why they chose slaves like me, and was what they told me, was that I don't know how to describe it, is that I was going to be granted freedom, to not be just like in chains constantly, because I was trained well enough, so I demonstrated my loyalty essentially, and I had demonstrated my like worth to them. So a lot of like my stuff was about like problem solving or different things like that, like to where they, like with me and the other pack mates, it's like there was an understanding that you were chosen for your position because you could just be told a directive and then figure it out on your own, rather than having to be told all of the steps in between, So for me, the hunter tracker stuff was really about and my gut, if I had to guess, would be that, it's probably going to be like a post-World War, like III kind of thing, or like invasion kind of thing, like my bets are on China personally,
Right.
that it's going to be like an invading force. Everyone's going to be fleeing because of, but really they're going to be working hand in hand with the US military,
Right.
So to or at least the NWO loyal one, to fucking bring everyone, under their heel. So
I think about it like continuation of government, like the 10 governors groups that like Obama was trying to form, so that after if there's some sort of event, they can just lock down with martial law
yeah.
and have our own government do it. I wasn't even
Well, and
thinking
that's
about
what
China.
that is what they had, so
Right.
essentially that's the other role I talked about that was after this hunter tracker phase, basically, like once all the refugees had been found, like I had essentially a role of a dark queen. But that's essentially, when I say queen, I don't necessarily mean that it's like really high up in the hierarchy, because it was kind of described that there was going to be a lot of small territories all over the world, basically, and that each small territory had its king and a queen, basically, that that ruled that area, and then would report essentially to to the hierarchy. So one of my roles that had been built off of those violent parts, were essentially, more of like we said, like Ghislaine type things, like parts that were like seen as like, they would have been a queen, to where we would have been helping we would have been second in command to the king, essentially just his slave, like basically to essentially be, help him like rule essentially the area, and, help get him victims for like his sexual pleasures, and fucking just do all the stuff, just essentially to essentially rule the area with an iron fist for the NWO, basically. But even that, like I've told people, it's like they had communicated to me that, that was supposed to be my role probably from like my like late 20s up until 35 or so, and then I would be sacrificed like in a ritual, basically, like after having like bred some for the cult and shit like that. So
did they tell you that you were going to be sacrificed? Was that, or
yeah. Oh yeah. So they did, for sure, because that was part of like what, like, but also for that part, you have to understand, like, they felt like it was like an honor, like
Midsommar, like at the end when they jump off the cliff and they're like happy to
yeah, you're so programmed, exactly, that part of you. I mean, I don't know how to describe it. It's like yourself dying is like way less traumatizing than the amount of shit I've seen as far as like had to participate in like babies dying or different shit like that. So like on a certain level, it's like by comparison, it's like for a lot of people that's a mind fuck, but by comparison, it's like, it's like it wasn't, internally, never didn't, death had always felt like on a certain level like a fucking escape or something, for me, because of the shit that I went through. And so for me, it's like, it was just like, 35, is going to be like my job done, and I'm going to be an honor to be a sacrifice in a ritual, at that point, to and then there'll be, some new young queen to take my place, basically.
Right.
So when it comes to the hunter tracker stuff, though, that was the phase before it, so essentially,
Right.
and
That's
I guess
why.
this
That's
might
where
be helpful
you had
because if
like
we
the
do get
physical
here,
training. Right. Go
yeah,
ahead,
because if
please.
we do ever get to this point, if anyone listens to this podcast and you're out in the woods and you see some lone female stumbling towards you, like maybe don't just take it for face value. So that's like the main
Right.
thing I say,
Kind of like in the movie there, the Book of Eli, where there's like a woman with a broken wheel on her cart, and she's like, oh, and like, and there's a bunch of dudes hiding, waiting, and like,
Oh,
it
yeah.
was a trap.
So it's like,
I'm
yeah,
sorry
like
to bring movies
mhm.
in. I'm sorry, but
No, no, no.
yeah.
I don't think I've seen. I think I might
Book
have
of
seen,
Eli is like,
but
it's
yeah. I
pretty
mean,
good.
they've put like all this shit, in so many movies.
Yeah, well,
It's not
how about
weird to
from your
reference
experience
movies.
instead of movies? I'm sorry I did
Yeah,
that,
no,
but
no,
like,
it's totally
so
fine.
what? Like, you would
So
be a wounded bird,
yeah,
basically.
so my instructions were like, and they even instruct to like different parts that come out essentially to play the different roles in the different areas. So essentially, like I would be at my home base essentially, and like that's just like where you see is like your home. It's like if you have to picture the mentality of like a dog or something. You know what I
Right.
mean? And like this
Your
feeling of like
territory.
loyalty to your masters, and it's your territory and everything.
Right.
So almost like a herding dog or something like that. Like that's just like, oh, go out and take care of the sheep, and it's like, all right, I'll go do that shit. Like we're gonna go nip at some hills or something, but it's way more
Right.
fucked up. So basically, for me, it was that they would give me intelligence as far as a direction to go look, essentially, like an area. And that at that point I was just supposed to get dropped off in the woods and just go live in the woods, basically just like looking around, like intentionally allowing myself to get dirty and disheveled looking and stuff like that, so that when I encountered a group of refugees, I looked like, someone not threatening at all, basically, so the
Plus,
whole,
you're female. Like, that's
yes,
huge for that
yeah.
role. Like,
And the sex parts are going to have a huge part to do with it too, for my particular training, so essentially, the training is this, is that if when I'm out in the woods, if I encounter a group of adults of 3 or less, then I don't let my presence be known. I wait until they are asleep, and then I use a knife essentially to dispatch them, essentially. And if they have any kids with them, then I'm supposed to take those kids with me back to essentially the base.
to be abused like you've been and all the
Yeah,
others.
yeah. My hunch is that it's like some orphan train shit too. Is that you would essentially be,
Oh, they sell the
like
kids into
literally you've like their term to us is like non-cooperatives. Like
people that are running away or
the people that are
non-cooperative.
running away. They're adults. They've already proved that they're useless to the cult. You know what I mean?
Right.
Except for maybe at like a work camp or something. But like I don't like that was never
Maybe the
really.
kids can be programmed for the use of the cult later.
Yeah, exactly. The kids are something that can still be programmed essentially to be, to be part of the new doctrine, the new world, that's being created. So then essentially, if there was 3 or more people, then what I had to do was essentially wait to approach them until I had like gained a little bit of intelligence on like the dynamics of the group if I could, but if not, it wasn't a big deal. The main thing was that I was supposed to injure myself, intentionally, basically, so that I could, stumble into the refugee camp and not be seen as a threat, essentially. And there would be, at that point, it would be the kind of the cult alter fronting. So the person that's, like kind of sweet and clever, a little ditzy, just seems like not, not a big threat at all. You know what I mean?
Like you're lost and like, oh, help.
Yeah, exactly. So grateful to have found them and yada yada. But but then at that point, then that's where it was supposed to diverge depending on the group. Essentially, is that I was supposed to be like, you're supposed to be like a spy, essentially, so like that's the front persona, but the whole time like the wolf persona and then like the violent sexual alter are also present for that whole scenario, essentially, to figure out like, at what point we can, successfully dispatch all the adults and all of the preteens and teens if they show, like, we're supposed to assess kind of like the preteens to decide which category they're going to fall into. Essentially, if they fall into the adult category, then we were supposed to kill them or murder them, and then same thing, take the kids. But essentially it would be like, assessing the situation. Like if it was a situation where I could rise through the ranks of the group through sex, basically, then that's the alter that would come out. Is that you would find the if the person that was the leader seems seducible, like then that's the route that we would go, because that's always the most powerful one.
Wow.
Not to say, but
so that's why you're so useful to them, being female and having the murder training, like with the you can use the knife, all this. Like you're the perfect weapon for them in this situation.
Yeah. I'm like 5'2", it's like I'm not gonna get anyone in hand-to-hand combat, but that's not what I was trained for,
Well, a knife will, I mean, you can kill a 350-pound dude with a knife, no problem.
Oh, yeah.
Like if you know how to do that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. And all the training about killing was supposed to do it while they're asleep. So it's about dispatching people very, very quickly and quietly, and then, and just being done with it, like as and that's it. It was all very like practical, the way things were like put to me, because I'm dealing with psychopaths. They don't have no emotion, so, and that's who was training me. So, so basically it would be either through sex, I would gain like some trust, in the group and status, or it would be through,
and value to the group. Like they would like to keep you there because you're giving them things. Yeah.
That was the other. So the other one was essentially like my more, I don't know how to describe it. It's like the more problem solving, like engineer brain side of me, essentially, that if the sex wasn't the route that I could do that, then I was essentially supposed to make myself insanely useful to them, It's kind of like how COINTELPRO works, like, so that's why like FBI is able to move through the ranks of these organizations so fast, is because they're not normal people. They have so much training and so all this different shit, so it's the same for me, is like that I would go there and I would start making life a lot easier for them, so whether it had to do with like cooking type things or had to do with like first aid kind of things, or like even like, it sounds stupid, but it's like, if you've seen like Alone, like even be able to like invent like stupid, like, comfort kind of style things, like MacGyver shit, type of stuff, like all that kind of crap is just what I was good at. And then also like what they intentionally like kind of like, I don't know, like they intentionally kind of like, sharpen that, that aspect of you. It's part of why I've been able to heal, though, like I have, is because it's my ability to like break down things into concepts and different shit that's like really allowed me to understand my own system and like, like all the shit that I went through, my ability to like research and like learn and crap like that. Like it's really like all that stuff that they chose me for, is really the reason that I've been able to get to this point where I'm at today, So it's nice for it not to be, being used against me anymore. But so
for your will, you own that. You own yourself. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Aw, thank you. It's its own gift, so, and its own reward. So, but yeah, so essentially, at that point, be really useful to the group, and the goal is that, at that point, if it's a bigger group, I have to do a lot more like logistics planning and stuff like that. I have to figure out how far away I am from the base. I have to figure out how to get together supplies so that I can.
Do you have to connect with the other two in your pack?
No,
Do they help you?
all of this was 100% like just for me solo, you know. So
I see.
so the whole point is that you want to get rid of all the adults and all of the teens or preteens that would fight, because you're intentionally using the older kids to like to carry and help take care of the younger kids, essentially. So I would
Oh,
need,
for when you bring them back to the
yeah,
base.
exactly. That's the plan, you know, is essentially that, you know, I would only be keeping around the kids that I myself could control, essentially, you know, because, and then we would all be trooping back, you know, to the home base, essentially. And,
But they would
you
have to
know,
trust you after all of your performances, like, and I mean,
yeah,
or
well,
like, or you
so
could
the
threaten them with a
scenario is
knife.
they wake up and like all the fucking adults are dead and everything like that. Like to be a kid and like have that level of trauma, and then you have one person that's been like a trusted person in the group that just is like, oh my god, I was on watch. What happened? Come on, guys, like let's
Good
go.
job on watch.
You know what I mean? Or so who knows? Like, but you're
Right,
dealing
still,
with
yeah,
trauma and stuff. They're not gonna. They don't analyze it. You know, it's like,
of
and
course.
they're
And
gonna be
you're an
susceptible at that
adult,
point.
like,
Exactly.
and
They're not. Yeah, you're not
they
gonna
just
have like a.
trust you.
Yeah, you're not gonna have like a 7-year-old be like, tell me the truth. You know what I mean? They're
Right,
just gonna be like, I am a 7-year-old in the middle of the woods now. Like
right,
my mom and dad are dead. Like, you know, like
right.
it's gonna be
And that
very.
trauma is going to keep them dissociative and obedient,
Yes,
right?
yes, exactly. So all of this is like, you can see how like carefully constructed this scenario
Right,
is, basically, you know. So essentially, you know, like I would just bring the kids back to base. That's where that kind of ends, essentially, you know,
right.
with that kind of thing, you
And then
know.
they'd bring you out and do it again. It's just what the,
Hmm.
I see.
Yeah, it's essentially just that's the thing, you know. I
Did
think
they tell
that
you
from what
anything
it
about,
communicated
okay,
to
go ahead.
me,
I'm sorry.
it was only if there were large groups that we were going to be teamed up or something like that. Like if they specifically knew like where a very large group was, then they might team us up for that reason, you know, but to do the exact same thing, you know.
Right. To gain the trust and you would just
Yeah,
work
to
together.
be to just look like three individuals that were just like fucking, you know, just also refugees and like fucking happened to stumble on this camp and, you know, welcome us in and we'll help everyone out, and then the same scenario, basically, you
Right.
know. So yeah, so the queen stuff that we had talked about, that was
Please. Yeah.
essentially, that was post all of this stuff. So that was like what was
Right. That's
communicated, like,
when they graduate you to the next level. Like, you did so good
yeah.
here. Now you get this reward where you get to wear, like, or
Yeah, you
you
can
know,
live in
have the
luxury, basically.
authority.
You know, like you're having to like do a lot of fucked up shit and still getting tortured a lot, you know, but you get to live in luxury, I guess, you know,
Right.
like, but that's it, you
Yeah.
know,
It's not like the Hollywood, what they say, like, you can be,
no, but you've
right.
been convinced the whole time. So, like, from like, you know, 3, 4 years old, it's like it was very ingrained in me when you're creating a slave like this that there's a hierarchy of slaves, you know. So it's like ingrained in you, like from a very young age, that it's like, well, this job sucks, but it could be way worse, you know. And like that's like why, like, I circling back to the achievement stuff and all that kind of stuff. Like
I can't
there was
imagine it could
always.
be worse. Like, oh,
Well,
man.
yeah, to see people like burned alive and skinned and fucking
Right.
like
But I
all like
mean,
all
yeah,
the.
you're seeing it. It's worse to be yeah, I guess you're right. Right, right. But I
Yeah,
mean, I'm
yeah.
thinking,
So
how could it be worse than what you had to, like,
yeah, well, and you have to also understand is like when you're dealing with the parts, they don't have consciousness of the
or
cumulative
logic?
trauma. You
Right,
know, they
yeah.
don't have consciousness of everything you went through. You know, they
Oh,
only
you're
have
right. You're right.
consciousness of their particular trauma. You know, so
Right.
like, you know, when you create an abuser alter, they're very intentionally have parts that their emotions and stuff are dissociated, and pain and stuff are dissociated into. So them even being able to believe that their abusers are that bad is difficult, because they're like
Stockholm syndrome.
they've been very, yeah, they've been
Yeah.
Stockholm syndromed into believing them. And then also like literally like the memories of pain, torture, all of that stuff is in the subconscious, you know. So you view
Right.
your life as pretty, oh, like maybe a little bad here and there, but it's like, but primarily like you're the
Right.
queen, or primarily you're like the wolf. You know, the wolf part of me had no knowledge that there was going to be a queen eventually, you know. The wolf part of me was just doing what it was doing because it knew that like there could be a way worse kennel that we could be in, basically, you know, and that was it, you know, that it was like for that part, you know, that part believe they're a fucking dog. They don't even believe themselves to be equal to a human, like to be, you know, like they see themselves in their own head, in my own head, you know, hierarchy wise, that there's, you know, your master here and you're here. Like the thought of like, you know, it'd be like your dog, like deciding that he was gonna, you know, drive around the car and pay the house bills or something like that, you know. It's like, no, like at that point your mindset is 100% that. So you're like, I rely on this person for my food and my shelter, you know, and like, and they give me, you know, all the good pets and self-esteem and all that shit, you know what I mean, and different shit like that. So it's like, and then like
the
I
way
said,
they
also,
break an animal is possible to break a human the same way.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah. That's 100% the case, you know. So that's like pretty much the, like at least the bulk of the NWO stuff that I.
Well, that's very informative.
Yeah,
because
I mean,
maybe a lot of us, especially the anarchist listeners who are
would be
already
those refugees.
homesteading. Yes, and there's, you know,
you better believe if I had fucking ended up out in those mountains, that fucking some chick stumbled into camp or dude or whatever, I'm like, no, like I'm like, fucking, let me make sure you don't have any fucking weapons on you.
Yeah.
Strip down now.
Yeah. Well, because you got to keep your people. You gotta protect the loved ones, you know, and like.
Well, yeah.
And everybody wants to help because they prey upon our humanity. Like everybody wants to help a stranger, you know, like I give money to homeless people. Like I want to help my friends, and it's just natural. It's like, and they see it as a weakness. Yeah. They use it against us.
Oh, this is something we can take advantage of.
Totally. And like they just like any, you know, like your sexual, they're using, like most men, like especially in a refugee situation that are like dirty in the woods for months, or, you know, away, haven't seen a woman or whatever.
Exactly.
Like that type of like, it's a primal urge, and the Satanists are like hijacking that and inputting an assassin. Like,
from what I understood, it's why I was always communicated with that I was like quote unquote special, but that seeking female slaves that were potentially, you know, sociopathic or something is like their like cream of their crop for sure, for that reason, you know, like, and it's why most slaves are women, you know, like it's like we vastly outnumber men, you know, when it comes to slaves, you know, and that's a lot of that is because, you know, I think the controllability, but it's also like you're gonna have an additional aspect, an additional asset, basically.
Another valuable thing.
Another valuable thing when it comes to the sex that, you know, when you're primarily targeting men, you know, there are female psychopaths, like we said, but, you know, but primarily in their ranks and everything, you know, it's a bunch of dudes, you know, and like, so, you know, they want blackmails, they want all this different stuff, you know, like they're, you know, and you will have gay people and stuff like that too, you know, but it's going to be a lot easier a lot of times, you know, and for guys to be like, have their guard down, you know,
right.
You're just
manipulated
with,
completely.
Just
like
you
myself,
know?
When I was 20 years old, I went to jail because I was like dealing with a cop who looked good in tight jeans. She was like all ditzy and fun and like, oh, she wants to, and then like when I was arrested in the room and they, you know, she like walks in with a badge around her neck. I was like, and like, you know,
and totally
went
different
to jail
persona,
for selling weed, like, you know, but that's you know, that's how they get you. The cops use the same plan, and the cops work for the same cult, basically, you know. It's really interesting to like learn this and to like to understand how their plans are, how their minds work. I really I know that we only have a couple hours, we had a couple hours, and like I really want to know more about their mind and like what you see as their affliction. I really love that you spoke about the spiritual, that, because that is huge. And
I think it hits a tipping point. I think it doesn't like that, the demonic kind of stuff, you know, that we're talking about, the negative entity type things, you know, it I don't, it just hits that point in that person's like head, you know, where they've, you know, I do think it's conscious choice, have consciously chose,
Right.
you know, to essentially shut off their empathy. And at that point, you know, they're willing, you know, and open to that. And I would even argue that I kind of feel like I know that from having the parts that were trained to be that way, you know, that, you know, once they were integrated to the part, their pain holder parts and stuff like that, they weren't even a little bit like that, you know, empathy was all there, you know, but like, it's like but having, you know, before healing, you know, having had those, you know, essentially those voices, those parts in my head and everything, you know, it was like a total mind fuck, you know, because it felt like I did have the voice of someone like that, you know, in my head, in addition to like my very, you know, true, genuine self, you know. And even though I wouldn't like, I had never in adulthood acted on any of that kind of stuff, you know, like if it was like, and for the most part, it wasn't even like things to act on. It was more like internal messages that I was evil, or just like, you know, it's like almost like our parts internally torture us. You know, the other parts.
Yes.
It's like our perpetuating the child abuse on the inside, basically.
Yes.
That's kind of like what's happening. So from like understanding the way that part worked before they healed, you know, the slave driver part, for example, it gives you a lot of insight into understanding how they can think about things, because it's like it really is like, you know, turning yourself into, you know, a computer or something like that, and just seeing things as zeros and ones, you know, and not seeing this like the spiritual significance, you know, the meaning behind life and everything like that. It's like, to them, it's like everything's an equation, you know, like everything's in a fucking equation. That's why I said the AI is just they're trying to figure us out like we're a fucking equation. Like God is like
Right.
some that they can get to at the end so that they can figure out how to defeat it finally. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
but it's not going to happen, you know. But that's also why I think a lot of these psychopaths, you know, have these positions of power and charity and all this different stuff, because I think that even in their own heads they're like, well, if I do enough, like, it's both a cover for the bad shit they do, but I think also that they do literally, from my dad, for example, like someone who goes to church every Sunday, you know, and everything, that it's like, and does certain things for a charity or other stuff in his
Just
head.
like Jimmy Savile, but go
Yeah,
ahead.
in his head, it's like, it's not just so he can have a cover where people assume that he's a nice guy, but I think in his head, the way he describes it, it's literally like, well, I do this many bad things and I do this many good things, and it's just like, it's just like, as long as they even out, I'm good,
Right.
you know. I don't
Right.
like, and it's like, no, like, once you fuck a child, you negate any good thing you have done in your life. I don't care
Right.
how much fucking good you've done. Like, if you couldn't do it without fucking harming an innocent person, then it's
Right.
not worth it, you know.
Right.
And that's like, that's what they can't understand, you know. And that's also why I'm really confident that we are making progress, you know, because I feel like the understanding of people like you, or just survivors of what they went through, like, despite the program getting more intense, I see more and more survivors waking up, you know. I see more and more people, you know, becoming aware of this thing, you know.
Yes.
And that has totally changed over the past decade, you know. So
That's
I'm, you know, likelihood that the internet's going to get shut off, or we're going to go through some crazy shit, you know, before the end is very, very high. I want people to know this, like, because as much as I'm like, don't give them too much power, like, when you understand a psychopath, you understand that they will fucking burn down the whole world if they know that they're fucking about to get caught, you know. Like,
yeah.
ideally, our best case scenario is that we start catching them enough to where they'll cannibalize themselves first. So essentially, that's my best case scenario, is that, you know, we start calling them out enough and they haven't been able to pull the trigger on this, like, this big thing, basically. And what's going to happen then, most likely, is that they'll start turning on each other, trying to essentially throw each other to the masses, hoping that it's going to create that cover or that good deed that's going to essentially hide them from what they
Right.
did, you know.
Right.
And I think you'll see that in like the royal family and shit like that to a degree, you know. It's like the degree to which, like, once the old guard is gone, you know, the new guard is like, you're still dealing with selfish psychopaths. And I don't think that there is, like, you know, as unified, essentially anymore.
Right. Yeah, because like they agreed to work together for this plan, but then if the plan doesn't work, they're going to try to find some other way, and they
It's
all
either
have
going to be,
blackmail.
yeah, it's either going to be like a fucking nuke situation. Like I said, it's either going to be something like where they really just go like, fuck it, we're going to nuke everyone and just go live in our bunkers, you know what I mean? Or
Right.
that's ideally not what's going to happen. Or that's going to be the suicide option for them. If they really understand that their gig's up, that's always a possibility. So
Wow.
just be aware of that. But
Right.
the alternative, is that, like I said, if we're already seeing it, in my opinion, is going to be this infighting basically between them. Once they realize that there's nowhere to hide, that the connections that have maintained their control across all sectors of society, once those start shaking, like I think you will start seeing them throwing each other under the bus to try and save themselves, essentially. And
Yes.
that's the day I'm just like dreaming about, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they kind of do already. Like they'll throw
Epstein or
Cosby or
someone. Yeah.
Epstein, right? And oh, he's bad, or
They
like
keep doing it, but
Weinstein.
they're noticing that it's not really working. It's not really working. After
Exactly.
Epstein, it's like they don't understand they're psychopaths. They're going to follow the same playbook essentially because they're not creative until it's forced for them to change. I think
You're
I have
right.
to kick off though. I
Okay,
had
well,
a great
thank you so
conversation
much.
though.
Me too. And I thank you very much for being here and spending this time. And I hope everybody visits Desert Bikini on
Yep,
YouTube.
more
And
videos to come.
beautiful. And I will keep in touch with you. Hopefully, we will have another one of these as soon as possible. Thank
I'd
you.
love to be on again. You have a great one,
Wonderful.
Sean.
Thank you. You too, Carrie. Thank you. Bye bye. And all you listeners, thank you again. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you for being here.